Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit. I'm one of the co-founders here at Red Chip Poker, and in this episode, we tackle a fundamental yet nuanced question. Is poker gambling? Many of us feel quite confident when it comes to answering that question, but it's especially important when talking about the game with people who don't play poker. This episode dives into the complexities of dictionary definitions of gambling, uncovers how perspectives shift depending on risk, and explores why poker often defies conventional labels. With that said, here's Coach Weasel to talk about poker and gambling. Enjoy.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. The title of this episode is Gambling. We're going to be answering the question, is poker gambling? The answer has to be yes from some perspectives, but also potentially no. And the big problem we run into is that the dictionary definition of gambling is equivocal. There are a lot of holes in the dictionary definition of gambling. For example, here are two definitions of the term gambling. Very simply, the first two results from a renowned dictionary. Definition number one, to play games of chance for money or to bet. Now, in some senses, it seems that poker is always going to be gambling from this perspective, to play games of chance for money. If you are playing poker and there is a chance that you're going to win money, then that appears to be gambling. Might seem black and white, that first definition, but think about this. What if you were given money by a poker site to play for free? For example, a no deposit bonus. You are given $5 to play poker with. You're not risking any of your own money, but you have a chance to win money. Is it still gambling? Well, you are technically playing a game of chance, hoping that you're going to make some money. So according to this fairly broad dictionary definition, you are in fact gambling. What if you were to enter a free roll tournament? Is that gambling? Most people would say no. They would say a free roll tournament, that's not gambling. You have a chance to win some money, but you're not risking anything. Therefore, it's not gambling. And many people would say the same if you were given a $5 bonus. That's not gambling. You can't lose anything. You were given $5 to play by the poker site. That's not gambling. There's no risk involved. But even that's not straightforward. You see, if you take that $5 and you turn it into $10,000, well, now that's money you could presumably withdraw at any point. So if you continue to play with that money, is that now gambling? Even though you started off with no risk, well, you've clearly profited from that no risk endeavor. Now you have quite a chunk of cash in your bankroll. Does it now become gambling just because you've spun that free no deposit bonus into a decent chunk of cash? And if it does become gambling, at which point does it become gambling? Some people might say if you start off with $0 and the most you could ever lose is $0 because you never deposit any money, then that's not technically gambling. You see, when we think of gambling, we think of there being some kind of inherent risk. So if you remove the risk, then surely it's no longer gambling. But according to the dictionary definition, if you're playing a game of chance for money, then it's gambling. So you can see it's always going to be gambling from some perspective. But from other perspectives, it's clearly not a black and white issue. Take this second dictionary definition from the same dictionary. Taking a risky action in the hope of a desired result. Now, when we read that, it seems like it makes sense, right? If you take a risky action, that's gambling. Notice we've taken a step outside of anything to do with money, just any risky action in the hope of a desired result. So you want to get to work quicker, so you run across the road without looking both ways. That's a risky action in the hope of a desired result. Maybe you're now going to get to work on time. But you see, there's a little bit of a problem here as well. At no point does this definition of gambling define which risk level is acceptable. And the reason why we have to qualify that is because we all take risks every day. Every time we leave the house, we're taking a risk that we might get run over. We might be a victim of crime. Anytime we get on an airplane, we're taking a risk. Admittedly, it's a very low risk. Planes don't crash very often. And we decide that it's an acceptable risk given the potential reward. So we don't think about it gambling. You probably never said that to someone. They're taking a vacation and you say to them, wow, you're going on a plane. You're just gambling with your life. We don't say that to people. We understand that there's inherent risk in everything. In fact, all of life is managing risk in appropriate quantities. So this dictionary definition that seems to make sense at first glance, take risky action in the hope of a desired result, it actually says absolutely nothing in fully drawing the line between an activity that's not gambling and an activity that's considered gambling. We might agree that running across the road without looking both ways, hoping to get to work on time, that's gambling. Flying on a plane, leaving the house, driving a car, these are all activities with inherent risk in the hope of a desired reward or result, but we don't think of them as gambling. So let's recap what we've discussed so far. The first definition there, play games of chance for money, bet. And we said, what if you can win without investing? Is it still gambling? What if you've never deposited money on a poker site? Is it still gambling? What if the most you could ever lose was exactly $0 because you decided you were going to use your no deposit bonus, and if you went broke, you were never going to deposit any of your own money? Is it still gambling? With that second dictionary definition, take risky action in the hope of a desired result. We saw that risk wasn't really qualified. We take risk every single day, and there are many activities that involve some level of risk that we don't think of as being gambling. When you think about it, the problem occurs when the risk becomes excessive. So we don't get upset if someone is boarding a plane to go on holiday, but if someone told you they were playing Russian roulette in the hopes of making 25,000 US dollars, for example, well, now the risk becomes excessive. Okay, you could make 25K, but you could also just die. And there's probably a 1 in 6 chance that you'll die, depending on how many bullets are in the chamber. So that now becomes gambling because the risk is excessive. Let's discuss the differences between investing and gambling. It's quite difficult to pinpoint exactly when a risk becomes excessive. So let's illustrate this with a game. And hopefully it's going to be a game that you would like to play. Here's how the game works. It's a heads-up game, so 2 players. It's $5 for you to play. In fact, pretend you're playing against me, okay? $5 entry. I'm going to draw a single card from the deck, and it's a straight-up deck, 52 cards, 26 black cards, 26 red cards. I'm going to draw a single card from a shuffled deck. If it's a black card, you are going to win $15 plus your $5 back. If it's a red card, then you lose everything, so you lose your $5. So it's 50-50. It's either going to be red or black. 50% of the time, you're going to lose $5. 50% of the time, you're going to make $15. Question is, do you want to play this game? And realistically, your answer should be yes. Hopefully, you can identify that this is a game that carries a positive expectation. Although sometimes, half of the time, in fact, you're going to lose your $5. The other 50% of the time, you're going to win $15. What this means is that the game has a positive expectation. In fact, every time you play this game, you're going to be making $5 in expectation. Ideally, we would just play this game repeatedly. And if we had the option to play this game repeatedly, I would not generally refer to this as gambling. I would refer to this as investing. And admittedly, we are somewhat stepping outside of the dictionary definition here, because we saw dictionary definition. This is a game. It's played with cards, there's money involved, this is gambling. So why would I refer to this as investing rather than gambling, assuming that we are looking to use these words in a more accurate, more industry-specific way than the Oxford Dictionary, for example? And I would distill this down into 3 key reasons why this is investing and not gambling, or at least it makes more sense to use the term investing, even if technically this is still gambling from a pure dictionary perspective. The first reason is the expectation of a single transaction is positive. Just take a casino game like blackjack, for example, assuming we don't have some kind of edge against the house. Mathematically, if we play the game for long enough, we will lose all of our money because we have a negative expectation. Or imagine the same card game we've just described, where the card is either red or black, but you're playing from my perspective. So you might win $5 50% of the time, or you could lose $15 50% of the time. Now, there's a chance that you could go on a really good run where you just end up winning way more than 50% of the time, and you actually profit over some kind of sample size. But just because you have that chance to profit doesn't make it investing, because mathematically, you're losing an average amount every single time you play that game. So rule number one, for it to be investing rather than gambling, you have to have, or at least reasonably expect to have, a positive expectation. Number two, the game can be played over a large sample size. So if I said to you, let's play that game, the red or black game, $5 entry, you can win $15, but you can only play it once. Well, it would still be reasonable if you chose to play that game, because that game has a positive expectation. But the thing is, it's also sample size that converts the activity of playing poker with a positive edge from gambling into investing. If the sample size is not there, it's just gambling. If I decide to just play one orbit of poker in my entire life, I'm going to play one orbit of poker at nosebleeds, even if I'm the best poker player in the world, but I'm only going to play one orbit my entire life, well, now that's gambling. Just because the expectation is positive doesn't mean it's investing instead of gambling. There has to be that sample size there where we're going to eventually run at expectation. In fact, the number one determining factor in whether you win or lose in poker on a single day is luck. Do you get dealt better cards than your opponent? If you do, you're probably going to win. If you don't, you're probably going to lose. It's that long-term sample size that converts the activity from gambling into investment. And once again, it's hard to draw a very, very explicit line where we say it has to be 50K. If you've played 50,001 hands, now that's investing. If you've played 49,999 hands, now that's gambling. We can't draw arbitrary lines like that. It's actually somewhat of a gray area at what point the sample size becomes large enough where the activity changes from gambling into investment. And if you look at nation states, they are also confused about this issue. This is why in some places, take US for example, poker players have to pay tax on their winnings. Whereas take other places like the UK, poker players don't have to pay tax on their winnings. Why? Because countries are interpreting things differently. Some countries are saying, you know what? This is gambling. If we just play 5 hands of poker, it's gambling. Whereas other countries are looking at this and saying, you know what? If someone does this with a specific system over a large enough sample size, well, it's actually now a profession. It's not gambling anymore. It's a profession. Or they might still call it gambling. They might say gambling is your profession. But the point is they recognize that over a large enough sample, the skill edge is there. But we might wonder, why is it that some countries say poker is a skill game, you must pay tax, but other countries say, well, this is just gambling, you don't have to pay tax on gambling winnings? It's to do with this issue of sample size, because poker is gambling over a small enough sample size, whereas it can become investing over a large enough sample size if you have a positive expectation when playing. Now, there is a third point here. So imagine the situation could be Russian roulette, or let's just imagine that you're playing with your life savings. So it's this card game again, but this time it's $1 billion to play. And let's just say you are not the CEO of Amazon, for example, and you only have 20K US dollars in your account, and someone's offering you to play this game. It's $1 billion. It's the same card game, red or black. But if it's red, then you win $10 billion. But if it's black, you lose your $1 billion. And furthermore, you can play that game as many times as you want. The problem here is that in reality, even if I'm telling you can play that game as many times as you want, unless you have access to ridiculous amounts of money, I'm assuming the average listener can't just access $1 billion US dollars just like that. Well, the amount lost here is excessive. You're realistically going to have one shot at this. We're gambling with too much. So the idea here is even if something has a very positive expectation, it's still gambling if the cost of losing is too much to deal with going forward. Take Russian roulette as an example. The reason why Russian roulette's not a great example is because it means you have to put a US dollar cost on your life in order to figure out the EV, which is not really something that I recommend you try and do. So it is easier to compare US dollars to US dollars. But Russian roulette is a good example in the sense that the cost of losing is too much. You're not going to recover from that. If you lose at Russian roulette, then you're going to die. So you're probably not going to be able to swing back from that at some point. You know, at least with the $1 billion example, you might have someone else who can lend you $1 billion after that. And who knows, you might have another shot at playing this game. You could still lose twice in a row, but the point is, you could potentially play it again, whereas with Russian roulette, once you're dead, you're probably not going to be playing the game again. So in any individual game where the risk of losing that game is so high, it can knock you permanently out of the game, well, now that's gambling. It doesn't matter that the expectation is positive. So just to summarize those 3 rules, if you tick all 3 of these boxes, then you are investing, you are not gambling. At least with the definition that we're using right now, which doesn't necessarily correlate with the dictionary definition, which is why no one can ever be fully wrong when they refer to a professional poker player as a gambler, because it's there in the dictionary. But the three things: expectation of each individual transaction is positive. The game can be played over a sufficiently large sample, and at no point can the amount lost be so excessive that it pushes us out of the game permanently. Now, there's a couple of other ethical issues that I'd like to touch on very briefly. I'm not necessarily going to give any opinions. It's just good to be aware of these ethical issues that others may bring up, especially non-poker players. It's at least good to be aware of the issue so you can have or formulate your own opinion on these ethical issues. So the first ethical issue that surrounds this idea of gambling, because although we draw a fairly harsh line between professional poker player and gambling, other people don't really see it that way. I mean, just to give you an example, I don't gamble. I don't play roulette. I don't play slots. I have no interest in gambling whatsoever. It's not an activity that I would even enjoy. Seems like something that would be fairly stressful. Playing roulette or blackjack, for example, it's just not for me. I don't get recreational experience out of that. For some of you, maybe you do. Okay, it's not really down to me to judge or anything like that. But something that people come up with, or one of the viewpoints that sometimes people have regarding gambling, is that it's unethical because it's greedy. This idea that you want something for nothing, or you want an easy payout. So you don't really want to work for your money. You just want to put everything on roulette and hopefully you'll get lucky. You just want that easy life where you don't really work for anything. You just gamble. You get a bunch of money that you haven't really earned. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying this is probably one of the viewpoints you're going to run into. Whether or not you agree with that viewpoint is up to you. But certainly from a professional poker player perspective, if you are a professional player, you'll know that this is a little bit insulting, because you'll know that poker players don't really get easy payouts. Okay, maybe they do sometimes in the case of like MTTs, for example. But generally, if you take a professional cash game player, this person works for their money. They spend a lot of time analyzing stats, running sims. The adage, it's the hardest way to make an easy living, is probably true. But of course, there's always going to be people that think that you're not really working. You're just hoping to get lucky, playing a card game. And you should just get a real job. You should just stop trying to get an easy payout to get something for nothing. Now, although I don't think this truly applies in the case of professional poker player, there is a little bit of a warning here in our attitude, in the sense that if we're approaching poker as an easy way to make a bunch of money, an easy way to make a living, a way to get something for nothing because we don't really want to do any work, it's probably not the best way of approaching the game. And I've seen many players who come into poker just hoping for an easy payout, and they don't last. The guys who last are the guys who like playing the game, and they profit as a result of the skill set they learn over a period of time. That's like the purest way to approach this. If you're purely getting into poker because you want a ton of money, it's a much harder route. Most players who approach the game with that perspective often end up losing everything, or just not doing very well, or end up dropping out. And certainly if you approach other less skilled gambling activities with that particular attitude, then you can end up losing everything. Like if your goal is just to get rich no matter what, and your medium for doing that is roulette, and you're going to put everything on roulette, you're probably going to end up going broke sooner or later, just because we're talking about something that's minus EV for each individual transaction. The other point that you'll sometimes hear in relation to this topic of poker and gambling is that poker should be considered unethical because of gambling addiction. In other words, fine, you're making all of this money playing online poker, but some of the guys that you're taking money off are actually gambling addicts, and they keep depositing to the site because they can't help it. They have a mental problem, and you're profiting off the fact that someone has a mental problem where they're spending all of their money playing online poker. There are two sides to this. The first side is that gambling addiction is a real thing and it's a very negative thing. But the other side to this is it's not fully our problem if someone is a gambling addict. It's not down to us as the players to be regulating who has a gambling addiction and who doesn't. It's really down to the poker sites to safeguard the clients who are playing on their network. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine you own a shop, and inside that shop you sell alcohol. Now, alcohol is something that can clearly be abused, and it does ruin people's lives. because they can't stop drinking. They get addicted to drinking alcohol. They keep on drinking alcohol to the point where they've physically destroyed their body. They become very sick. They can't necessarily function in society. This is a bad thing. Does that mean as a shopkeeper that you should not sell alcohol because you know that a small percentage of people who come into your shop may actually be affected by this problem of alcohol addiction? And if someone said to me, actually, because of alcohol addiction, I'm not going to sell alcohol in my shop, then that's a viewpoint that I can fully respect. Good on you. But also if you said, I'm going to sell alcohol in my shop anyway, I don't think alcohol addiction is a good thing, and I would never knowingly sell to someone who had an addiction problem, but I'm still going to sell alcohol in my shop anyway, then I certainly would not judge you for that. It's a somewhat complex issue. You can see how people may end up on both sides of this. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this podcast, you're of the viewpoint that really it's not down to us to protect people from themselves in terms of problem gambling, but it's actually down to the poker clients, the poker sites that offer these gambling services to have certain safeguards in place. And also just a general viewpoint that it's difficult to give up your entire career just to safeguard a small percentage of individuals. And the weird thing is that this is going to happen no matter what you do. There's going to be someone that's affected negatively by your actions. Even if you start a perfectly legitimate business selling a certain product, there's going to be competing businesses that will be affected negatively due to the fact that you're trading in the same space. They're going to lose some percentage of their customer base as a result of you operating. It's very, very difficult to do something that doesn't affect other people in a negative way at some point. So once again, it becomes about drawing the line somewhere and deciding which types of activities are acceptable and which are not. Driving a car or flying in a plane is also an activity that affects others negatively. It damages the environment. Some things we may have to just accept are an acceptable sacrifice for the benefits we get. Or maybe you also disagree with traveling in a car, or you disagree with air travel, in which case, once again, good on you. There's no judgment here. These are things that are not good for the environment, for sure. Some of these ideas start to get a little bit arbitrary when you consider how a similar activity is glamorized. Trading stocks. If someone makes a lot of money trading stocks, it's pretty rare someone's going to point the finger at them and saying, hey, you're gambling. Like if you hear someone's a day trader or they make their money trading stocks, that's considered a legit profession. But a certain number of the people who make it big trading stocks are actually employing minus EV strategies. In other words, they're absolutely gambling. It might not be called gambling by everyone, but remember those three things we're looking at, what differentiates gambling between investing? Well, let's just say some traders are not ticking all three of those boxes, and they're taking very, very big risks. So really, you can see this term gambling, it's really not a very specific term. There are certain activities which are clearly gambling, which don't always get labeled as gambling. And there are other activities which I would probably refer to them as investing, such as playing online poker over a large sample size with a positive edge. That to me, the term investing is more fitting. Ultimately, it's down to you to decide on whether poker is gambling or not, or whether that word actually really means anything, whether it's important. In some ways, poker is always going to be a form of gambling, just based on that dictionary definition we looked at. But it might be more accurate to consider the activity as investing for the select few who are playing over a large sample size with good bankroll management with a positive expectation. As we've hopefully seen, the word gambling does not neatly apply to the concept of professional poker. It just doesn't fit. That's why we have to re-engineer our own definition of the terms gambling and investing. And based on those new definitions, where we're gambling if we don't meet those three criteria we outlined earlier in this podcast episode, recommended to avoid gambling at all costs. But investing, for example, playing professional poker with good bankroll management and a positive edge, well, that's something that shouldn't really be treated as any different to trading profitably on the stock market or the Forex exchange, for example. However, as with all things, we've just highlighted some of the issues that surround this topic. It's certainly up to you to decide exactly which activities you think are acceptable and which are not. Okay, hopefully you found this enlightening. Thanks very much for listening. This was Coach Weasel, and this was the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Also remember that one of the best ways to lower your risk is to study between sessions. If you're newer to poker study, I highly recommend signing up for Core today. It's a complete training platform for beginner to intermediate players with over 200 lessons that are structured so you're always studying the next best thing. Poker knowledge stacks nicely, and Core does all of that stacking for you. Plus, Core is only $5 per week. Sign up today at redchip.poker/core, and we cannot wait to see you in there. Until next time, good luck out there, and happy grinding.